Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of 10 Adventures, and this is the 10 Adventures podcast. Each week we talk to real people about real adventures as they explore this incredible planet we all live on. Hi there, welcome to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're going to talk about bike touring with Karin. Karin's an accomplished bike tourer who has spent the last about 10 years becoming more and more adept at bike touring around the world. And I'm excited about today because bike touring has been something I've been interested for almost 20 years since I first heard a fellow hostel mate in Toledo, Spain, who was biking across Europe, and he had everything in his possession was in his saddlebag. Not everyone is that efficient in their packing, but I want to talk with Karin today to learn more about how people can learn to bike tour. And so welcome, Karin.
Hi there.
So first off, Karin, what is bike touring? You know, I do a lot of road biking, but when does a road biking turn into bike touring?
Well, I think the definition's kind of soft, but to me, bike touring is where you're on your bike and you're using that as your mode of transportation to travel from place to place to place to place. And there's lots of different ways of doing that, but that's how when I talk about bike touring, that's what I'm referring to. I usually highlight that bike touring, when used as a verb, isn't the same as a bike tour, which is when someone's guiding you on a bike trip, because I find that's a place where people often get mixed up when I'm trying to talk about it.
The first question I have is, you know, you've become quite accomplished at bike touring, but how did you get to this point? You know, what has your journey been from, you know, not knowing anything to now someone who's regularly going out on pretty incredible bike tours?
Well, I got into biking later in life, probably in my mid-40s. And it started when my kids got older and didn't need as much attention, and I wanted to get into fitness. And my trainer pushed me to get a bike and incorporate that into my life. And around the same time, I was meeting friends who were into biking, so going out on some small group rides, that type of thing. Now, eventually, that small group of friends said, hey, we should all go on a bike trip. And at that point, we did a bike tour, not bike touring. So we, went with a company and we did a bike trip down in the Napa Valley in California for a week. And that was really fun. Now, that trip meant that we traveled from place to place, and it was a hotel trip, so hotel to hotel. And the company that we had hired planned our route and planned where we would stop and would have people to meet us on the way with snacks. Planned most of the time where we would eat our meals, and of course they transported all of our gear. So that was our bike tour. And we ended up doing a couple of those over a number of years. We did another one in southern Italy as well, which was really fun. Kind of after that, we were thinking, well, I really enjoy this, like being on the bike, traveling from place to place. You really start to see things in a different way because you're moving really slowly, relatively. You're stopping in little tiny places. So it's just a different way of seeing the world. And we decided we wanted a bit more freedom, but we weren't really ready to plan a trip out all by ourselves without really knowing the location. So then we did a few self-guided trips. That's where a tour company plans the trip for you and tells you where you're going to stop and gives you maps and directions, or sometimes they would give us a GPS track to follow. But then how your day proceeded was your choice, right? So if you wanted to sleep in and get your kilometers done, and like one of the ones we did, we went to Switzerland and it was boiling hot then. So we actually did the opposite. We got up really early, tried to get all of our biking in before it really heated up for the day. And then we'd have more the afternoon to lounge around. So we did a few trips like that. And the trips became increasingly independent. So for that Switzerland one, a fellow met us in Geneva, gave us our bikes, make sure they fit us well, went over all of the plans and the maps, and then we were on our own after that. But we did another self-guided trip where it was even more independent, where we showed up at a hotel in Portugal. Our bikes that we were renting from them were shipped to us at the hotel. They weren't completely put together at that time. We had to put on pedals, put on the handlebars, get everything kind of tuned up. Now, these weren't big adjustments that needed to be done, but if you weren't familiar with putting parts of a bike together, that could have been quite intimidating. And then that one, then we were completely on our own after that. They gave us the route. They told us where we'd be staying the night. But again, we were on our own time. As far as our pace for the day and where we'd stop or how often we would stop. And actually what we were finding is that we were really enjoying that. We were really enjoying the freedom. Like, oh, I'm tired today. I want to sleep in a bit. Wow, let's get going. It's supposed to rain at 2 p.m., so let's try and get as far as we can before the rain comes. Or I remember one time we were so exhausted, like we barely went any distance at all. So we just had a really, really easy day. And then we started thinking, like that's good, but like I really like the freedom. I like the freedom for me of, like, I'm going to decide today where I'm going to stay. Like, I'm not going to decide a month ago. I'm going to decide today. And I wanted the freedom to decide how far I went, when I stopped. I wanted to have the freedom that if I was in a place I thought was incredible, that I could just stop and spend the day there. I wasn't in a rush to get moving. And so that's when we decided to do a bike tour. Now, my first bike tour that I did was a short one, and it was a friend of mine who was into biking, and she really, really wanted to do part of the Oregon Coast Road, but she only had 7 or 8 days to do it, and neither of us had done, a completely independent bike tour before. So that was the first trip that I did, was with this friend of mine, and she really, really wanted to camp for that one too. And I've done a lot of backpacking and hiking, so yeah, tenting for me is okay, but I was really surprised when she wanted to do it. The good thing about that route is it's a straight road. There's a few minor deviations off that road, but there's really not a lot of route finding required to travel that route. So, there didn't require a whole lot of planning for that. The only constraint that we had, though, was time, is that we had planned to leave Astoria in the northern part of Oregon and cycle down. And there was only one place that was a reasonable distance away where we could get a rental car to cycle the whole way back. And so we did have to do a certain distance every day so that we could get there and then get back to our car, because we had driven to Astoria from Vancouver Island. Now that was a great trip because we had never done it before. She had a bunch of hybrid, like $900 hybrid bikes, and that's what she wanted to take, which was fine with me. We both bought panniers for the back for our gear, and we had a sleeping bag and our tent and a mattress and a stove so we could have coffee in the morning, and clothes that we'd need for the day and the night. And that was a super fun trip. Super fun trip. The highlight of that trip, though, was the camping in the end, because the campsites along there were just incredible, like really incredible. And as a biker, all those tent sites or campsites are filled up in the summer, but as a biker, they had specific bike camping spots that you could just walk up for. So we'd be going to all these campsites along the Oregon coast that you couldn't get reservations for the life of you, but as a biker, we could just ride in and off you go. And sometimes we had the prime spot. The problem with that route, though, is that most of it is on a busy highway. So you're pretty much biking down a single lane highway. And in some places there was a pretty good shoulder to ride on, but some of the places there was virtually no shoulder. And so you'd have these huge, camper trailers or trucks racing by you at 100 kilometers an hour when you had a very narrow shoulder. And I remember one time I just had to pull off the road. And my friend said to me, "Oh, Karin, are you okay? Like, what's up?" I said, "I just need a mental health break," because just all those cars on a really tight, narrow, it was just a bit much there. So when we started planning for bike tours after that, we were really hoping for quieter roads. But again, we wanted the freedom of deciding the day of where we're going to go. So then the next big trip that we did was a European bike trip. We had 6 weeks that time, so we had a lot of time. And I did a lot of research beforehand, like where exactly are we going to go? Because you hear a lot about bike routes in Europe and they exist, but coming from Canada, I didn't know about them. And then in my search, I found out about these Eurovelos. Euro, like European, Velo, as in bike in France. So these Eurovelos are preset routes that have been established by a biking community in Europe that are in varying degrees of development, definitely varying degrees. So some of the best ones they'll be like hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of exclusive bike lanes with routing on them. So an example of that is the Eurovelo 6 that goes through the Loire Valley in France and then continues on east. And though I haven't been on the part further east, what I've read is that the, specific bike lanes continues on through when you get to Austria. And, it's like a pretty well-developed bike route. We had decided to do the Eurovelo 8, which is a bike route that goes along the Mediterranean. Now, if you look at the website for the Eurovelo, it starts like in the Mediterranean, well into Spain, goes all along the Mediterranean coast, then into France. And so we decided, just because of ease of getting there, we would we fly into Barcelona and then start in Girona. Now, the thing we didn't realize was the varying states of development. And in that eastern part of Spain, there was the occasional sign, but it was definitely not obvious. And we definitely felt like we were getting educated quickly. For example, when I had done the bike tour down the Oregon coast, I never really needed a map very often. Like, it's pretty much straight on the road. But all of a sudden, we're going through all these little towns, through small towns on the coast, weaving in and out of the eastern part of Spain. And we're like, holy smokes, like, I need a GPS track to follow all the time. So we had a lot of learning along the way. Like, we had to have our phone mounted on our handlebars so we could always see a GPS track. That meant a stop in a Girona bike shop to buy a handlebar mounting device and other things that came up like that. Once we got into France, though, the development really changed, and it was a very well-developed, although not an exclusive bike route there. You were just on an assortment of small streets, sometimes busier streets. And we went all along the Mediterranean coast of France to Nice. And then we had a couple weeks left before we had to fly home, and we were flying home from Paris. So we rented a car, drove up to the Loire, returned the car, got back on our bikes, and then rode the Eurovelo 6 back in the direction of Paris. So that was a 6-week trip, and that was pretty amazing. So we were anxious to get back and do another bike tour like that. The next time we had 4 to 5 weeks, and we decided to head to Spain. This time we didn't follow a Eurovelo. We were planning to, but we had some friends who wanted to come, and they really wanted to cycle Andalusia. And we had been there on a bike trip before, but not on our own. And we said, sure, like that was a great place to cycle. So that time we did a lot of the route planning ourselves, and a lot of the route planning, we would check into a hotel and I would spend the next hour kind of on Strava or Map My Ride or Ride with GPS, looking at the common routes cyclists were doing in the area, because presumably the routes people are doing a lot of the time are the nice rides. And then I would kind of plan the route that way, but it took a lot of research for that. But it was fun, and that way we could, see what we felt like every day.
Now, Karin, you are, in my opinion, someone who loves researching trips. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I don't shy away from it. Let's put it that way.
So I think, and I also would enjoy that. I think most people would hate every night saying, I don't know where I'm going tomorrow, and be, trying to figure that out. I think that's unique to you and a few other people. But I'm really interested in your journey. You started off kind of with a guide and a company, them doing everything for you, and you're really just focusing on the riding. Then with the self-guided, you're still not worried about all your gear. You're having your gear transported each night, but you do have some route finding to do and more flexibility. And then in the end, you went to just doing it all yourself. Now that was your journey. Is that the way you'd recommend it? Or, if someone's starting from scratch, what would be the first step you'd suggest for them?
I don't think there's one answer for everybody, because for example, it would depend on finances, like how much money you have to spend. So I know my son, who is a young man, and he just started bike touring because that was all he could afford, right? So he started bike touring, and he did it camping. So he's not staying in hotels, but he did that for financial reasons. And he started close to home, like just in our area, to little islands close by. But having said that, when I started this, I was a little bit older. My husband wasn't that keen on camping. He wanted, to stay, be able to have a shower every night, not have to worry about that. And so the way we progressed it seemed very natural. Like certainly going on a bike tour, tour in the noun version, was very easy. You didn't have to plan too much. You just showed up. We went in a small group. That made it very pleasant. Like we would bike all day and chat on the bike and meet for dinners. And there wasn't, as you mentioned, there wasn't really much to worry about. And then as we went on to self-guided, that was like really fun. Again, there wasn't too much to plan. Like if I was busy at work, all I had to do was get the flight and show up, and someone was going to point me in the right direction, or things would be arranged for me. And as far as self-guided, there was a big range in what that included as well. So the first self-guided we did, as I mentioned, was that one in Switzerland where, one of the guys from the company came out and just gave us all the information right at the beginning. That was like very reassuring. The other reassuring thing about that is you knew that if there was a trouble, there's always someone to call. Like if your bike completely broke down, there was a contact number for someone to call. So there wasn't too much anxiety with that. And then as things progressed, we had less and less hands-on help for self-guided trips. And in fact, the last one that we did self-guided was the one where they shipped the bikes and we had to kind of put them together. And that one, we had to carry our gear too. It didn't include luggage transport. So, there's a huge variety in what's out there. I think like as far as progression, it would depend on finances, like how much you want to spend, and time to plan things. Because as you mentioned, a lot of people would not want to be route planning for an hour or an hour and a half in the early evening while they're on a short holiday. I was on a trip for 6 weeks, so I had time to do it.
Yeah, I think that idea of time as well. With guided trips, usually there's a support van as well. So if, you're a group of friends and you just, maybe you've, tweaked your knee or there's a malfunction in your bike, there's, you can either A, hop in the van, or B, mechanic can work on your bike. If you're only doing a 7-day trip, you don't want to lose a day or two because your bike, something's wrong and it's a Sunday and you can't get parts.
Those both things happened on my first bike trip. One of the days was like over 100-kilometer day that was planned, and the end of the day started with a big climb, and it was boiling hot, like uncomfortably hot. And so right before that big climb, I think we were already 80 kilometers in, I was like, I'm just not into a big climb at this, time of the day. So I took the van, and then my husband on that climb got a flat when he was almost the whole way up. But luckily the van was right there, and Kate came and changed his tire for him. So it was seamless. It was seamless for him.
Yeah, and one other thing, I know we have a partner here in the Canadian Rockies that does, incredible bike tours. But the weather is really variable in the mountains here in Canada, but also other places. And he says a lot of times, yeah, like if you're an early season ride, it can just have a freak, midday snowstorm where you don't want to go over the pass, even if because you're like, you know what, let's just get in the van and we'll just, I'll go in today. And it makes it a lot nicer. I'm interested in, most people who are listening to this or who want to do a bike tour have a bike. Maybe they've got a cyclocross or a gravel or a road bike or a mountain bike. But if you're going to do, one of these long distance bike tours and you're not going to, rent a bike, what type of bikes do you see people using for bike touring?
There's just not one type. So first of all, a lot of people will say is you can do a bike tour on whatever bike you have. But what might change is how comfortable you are, right? For example, a lot of the early trips that we did, we rented a bike, and most of the time you just got the bike they gave you. Usually they would give you a pretty good bike, but the style was up to what they thought was best for the terrain. And for the most part, that was true. We got pretty good bikes that worked well. And then when I did the trip with my friend along the coast of Oregon, we rode her hybrid bike. She had a bunch of hybrid bikes. Those weren't expensive bikes. They were upright hybrids, and they had racks on them, so we carried panniers.
I know some people are confused or they may not know what a hybrid bike is, but, can you maybe just describe what a hybrid bike is versus, a conventional road bike or a mountain bike?
A lot of those kind of bikes are the bikes people ride around town. So they're not necessarily a city bike, but they're a more upright bike. You're not really leaned over. And usually they have tires big enough so that you can go on some gravel trails if you needed to, and also be on the road. So they're probably like maybe hybrid, meaning multifunction type of bike. So those weren't super fancy bikes, but they were completely adequate, and we had a great time on them. And then you asked about mountain bikes. I mean, you hear, I haven't done it, but a lot of people do bike packing. So bike packing is where you're doing a point-to-point tour, but you're going on almost exclusively gravel trails, and in that situation, usually mountain bike trails, so with more steep and varied terrain. So people do bike packing on mountain bikes, usually with a different setup on that. And then as far as kind of what, for us, we've evolved into is we have touring bikes. So they're bikes that are designed to, one, carry a load, because you're going to be carrying your gear. And your gear might be small. It might just be what you need for the day and to sleep in. You might have, it might be really small if you're going to stay at hotels and eat out for all your meals. Or there might be more of it if you're planning to camp and you want to cook as well. So the first thing about a touring bike is it's made to carry a load. It usually has a broader wheelbase, so that means the distance from the front to the back wheel is broader, and that's to kind of give you more stability in the long term. It means you can't corner as fast, so that's not a bike that's meant to be going around tight corners or that type of thing. And it usually has you a little bit more upright, just because if you're going to be on a bike for 6, 8 weeks, 52 weeks, whatever, you want to be comfortable in there. But you can tour in any of them, probably. You could even have your road bike, which is, a bike that's designed more to be aero efficient. You're more hunched over, you're down, you're more crunched up. It aims to go faster. You could do a bike tour on that. It just might not be as comfortable over a number of days and hours.
You mentioned using any type of bike, and I remember meeting a bike packer in East Africa, and he had just some junky old mountain bike, and he'd put those big white tubs that you see in like restaurants. They get like their oil in, and he'd like strapped one on each side for his panniers. And so it was like a $50 or $100 setup for his bike and his panniers. And he was going all the way down East Africa, all the way down the coast. So he was doing thousands of kilometers. So you're right, you can use anything. But that leads us. You're talking a bit about panniers, and I'll confess that during the pandemic last summer, I got addicted to bike packing videos, and was, thinking how I'd go ultralight with my bike and do stuff here in the Canadian Rockies. And I asked you lots of questions. So maybe can you talk a little bit about panniers and what you use and why? Because I think it's everyone says, go as light as you can, go super light. But you have, a lot of experience, and I'm interested in your approach to panniers and packing.
We started it without a strong feeling about things. We just started with panniers because that's kind of what we were seeing. So, panniers are when you have bags that you're strapping to a rack on the back of your bike. Some people have panniers that go on the front of their bike. We never had enough gear that we needed that. Yeah, there has been lots of talk, lightening it up even more, going to more of a bike packing setup where they have, packs of varying sizes that go kind of tucked in under your seat and extending back and attaching a lot to the handlebars. I must say, initially I thought that was more for bike packers, meaning people that were going out on mountain bikes on rough terrain. That's how I understood bike packing at the time. So I didn't see it as something that I would do if I'm, cycling mostly on roads. But I know that there are people using that setup right now. I haven't tried it. Kept going with panniers, one, because we had them. And two, we were touring in the way that we were staying in hotels. So it's pretty easy every night. You park your bike wherever you can. Sometimes that varies, like where we could park our bike. Sometimes we would bring our bike into our hotel room. Sometimes hotels wouldn't let you do that, and you'd have to put it in their personal locked up garage 2 blocks away. And sometimes, they'd say, oh yeah, we have some private bike parking, but it's like 5 blocks away and here's the key and all that. So with that in mind, panniers were really easy because all of our stuff was in 2 panniers. We just had 2. And we had, shoulder straps for them. So it would be clip on your shoulder. And then, we'd be good to go. The other thing you had mentioned is like with bike packing, they put a lot of gear on their front handlebar, and I haven't been keen to rush to that because when we did our first bike tours, we did have just like a regular small handlebar bag bar, like where you'd put things that you needed for the day, like your phone or sunscreen or a first snack for the day. But what I found that really affected my steering and made me unstable. And in the end, I stopped using mine. My husband still uses his, and he has a lot of stuff in it, actually. But I didn't like a weighted handlebar, so I started just carrying stuff like that in a waist bag, actually, because I just felt more secure to me.
Now, are there any tips on gear? Lots of people they're used to going out on a bike ride around their home. Going on a bike touring trip, is there any gear that you're like, oh, this is a must have to have, in your panniers or on your waist pack when you're out touring?
Well, I'd say the first thing would be comfort. Like if you're going to be spending 6, 8 hours a day for 6 weeks or 2 weeks on a bike, you want to be comfortable. So I think the first thing is to think, okay, what are you comfortable wearing? Because if it's kind of bugging you when you're going out for your day ride, it's going to really bug you on the 7th day wearing it. Because in general, what we were carrying was like one set of clothes for wearing, a backup set in case something happened, but usually our backup set would be kind of a layering system. So, short sleeve, long sleeve, that type of thing. Because you don't want to carry, because it is true, the more stuff you carry, the more difficult every single climb you do is going to be, because you're going to be wishing you didn't have that pair of jeans in your pannier. I think comfort's really important. But you have to figure out what it is that makes you comfortable. So what are some of the extras we plan for? So when I was camping, we would have tent, sleeping bag, sleeping mat. We chose to have a stove so we could make coffee in the morning, but that would be an optional thing. When we were going from hotel to hotel, one thing that I never thought about was on that first big 6-week trip, when we got to Europe, because we had taken our bikes on a flight from Canada, my bike, I don't know, I think it must have got hit in transit, and the hanger was bent. And it meant that I could only use kind of half my gears in each ring, the little ring and the big ring at the top. And I took it in several times in Europe, like to ask if they could fix it, and was told repeatedly that they couldn't fix it. They were sorry because my bike needed a special hanger, a special part that attaches the gearing. So that was something neither of us kind of knew was coming. So we now cycle tour with a spare hanger, because that is a commonplace of damage, especially in transit. So that would be something important. We really, really enjoyed shopping when we were touring. And by shopping, I mean grocery shopping, like going into buy groceries or buy wine in France or Spain. Like that's a really fun experience compared to doing it at home. And we loved like having little picnics when we were either en route or when we got to where we were going. So we started cycle touring with, like a lightweight plate and lightweight cutlery, so that, we could have picnics wherever we wanted. We could have salads, we could have cheese and baguette, and it was really fun. And then we got to the point where we loved European olive oil and European balsamic vinegar, but, we can't buy a bottle and carry that. Well, actually, my husband did carry a glass bottle of both of them for a little while. And I'm like, come on, this is ridiculous. So then we started carrying little Nalgene bottles that we could put olive oil and vinegar in, because it just was so nice to stop and have a baguette with oil and balsamic and a salad and cheese and prosciutto, and it was really great. So those were some of the tricks that we started doing.
What about rain gear? I've talked to some people and they're just say, if it's a big heavy rain day, they might just take a day off because it's just, 8 hours in the saddle and pouring rain. They didn't like it. Some people, they have rain gloves, a raincoat, rain tights. They're like, rain booties. They're fully capable and they bring all that gear with them. Where did you guys land on that?
We were probably like your first bout of folk that you talked to. We weren't planning to do an 8-hour rain day. But, I mean, if you're cycling for 6 weeks, you're not going to escape the rain. So we had rain jackets, rain pants. We chose not to bring booties because neither of us are too worried about having wet and cold feet. That doesn't bother us. We did have rain gloves. Also, is really important would be a visor for the rain. So I just had a ball tube, which I used in southern Spain when it was really sunny. So a ball cap under my cycling hat. I looked very, very cool.
And then you're planning a big trip for this autumn. Do you want to just share your next objective for your next tour and why you chose this itinerary?
Sure, but I'm going to tell you about the trip that never was as well. So because of the pandemic, we are not on the big trip that we were hoping to be on. So our trip that we really wanted to do was to fly into Rome and then head down to the tip of the country and then take the ferry across and then cycle the south of Sicily and then get a ferry and cycle up the coast of Sardinia and then head back to the mainland and back to Rome to fly out. I think we had 4 or 5 weeks to do that, but that got canceled. And then we were planning to do that again this spring, but that's going to be canceled too. But our backup trip, which we planned for the fall, and I guess we'll see with the pandemic whether it happens now, is a bigger trip. My husband said that after a year of pandemic, he's going to be ready for a really big trip. So we have 8 weeks. We're flying into Paris, and then our aim is to take the Eurovelo 6 out along the Loire to the coast. And then one of the other big cycle routes in Europe is the Eurovelo 1. It starts up, I think, around in Norway and goes down, and it then goes along the Atlantic coast of France and then goes down into Spain and around into Portugal. So our plan is to take the 6 out towards the coast, then the Eurovelo 1 down the Atlantic coast of France, and then once we hit northern Spain, we're thinking we'll get off the Eurovelo 1 and travel more along the north coast of Spain, which is where the Camino is. There is actually a North Camino, the walk to Santiago de Compostela. So cycle along that area. And then depending on time, heading down and along the coast and into Portugal and heading home from Lisbon. The good thing about cycle touring in Europe is, one, towns are very close together. So if you have a really bad weather day, you don't have to go far before you're in a town and can find a place to stay. And the other thing is, if you're making very poor time, let's say you've hit the winds wrong and you're doing far less kilometers than you were expecting to do in a day. Well, the thing is, they've got great public transit. So if you have to be in Lisbon on the 5th and it's the 1st and you're still in Spain, well, you can get on a bus or a train, and they all take bikes in some form or another. So you don't have to worry too much about the exact timing of things.
Any tips, if you think back when you first started this or just when you were thinking about bike touring, think back to what you knew then. Are there any tips of hey, here's some really good ideas to make this, this transition to being a bike tourer easier?
Well, one, make sure you have somewhere to mount your phone on your bike so you can follow a GPS track if that's what you're following. And I think the big thing is just being comfortable. Like, make sure that you have a setup that is comfortable for you, because you're going to be on that for a long time.
Excellent. Well, this has been really great, and I'm now really jealous of your trip this autumn, assuming everything keeps getting better for the pandemic. If people want to see some of your photos from some of your last trips or follow you, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram, and my name there is @AdventureAfterAll.
Excellent, Karin. Well, thank you for sharing all these tips for bike touring. It's great to get this kind of firsthand advice from someone who's out there doing this all the time.
Good talking to you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you liked it, why not give us a review? Better yet, subscribe and get inspired again and again. Also, if you want to find your own adventures, why not check out 10adventures.com, where you can use our free resources to plan your own trip or book a tour in over 60 countries and make your own epic memories on your next adventure.